So for over 1,000 years, the Avatar has existed as the protector of peace and balance between both the humans and the spirit worlds. And of course, we're all familiar with avatars such as Aang, Korra, and even Roku. However, did you know that there are currently 12 avatars that we not only know of, but have also seen throughout the long lifespan of this series? All with incredible stories and journeys of their own, and each being more powerful and important to the world of Avatar than the last. However, sadly, over time, many of these have actually been completely forgotten about and lost to time itself. So with that in mind, I've decided to take it upon myself to go through each of them one by one and break down absolutely everything that we currently know about them and their time as the Avatar. So as to hopefully not only give you more information about them, but to also give them the credit and the respect that they deserve, being that they were, once upon a time, an impressive and important avatar to the series that we all know and love. So with that said, and without wasting any more time, let's begin with the first avatar to ever exist in the entire Avatar universe, Avatar Wan. Now Wan, approximately 10,000 years before Korra's time in 9829 BG, created something that would eventually become known, needed, and loved all around the world. Something that is extremely powerful and unique. I'm of course talking about the Avatar cycle. Now he did this by bonding with Rapha and becoming what we would eventually call the Avatar. Now Rapha is essentially the spirit of light and peace, the Yang to Fato's Yin, the oldest and wisest of all currently known spirits. And in fact it is even stated that Rapha and Fatu have existed for over more than 10,000 lifetimes before even the first appearance of humans, meaning they're both pretty damn old, on top of being incredibly powerful. Now in 9830 BG, after her grasp on Fatu was forever severed by Wan himself, Rapha was forced to team up with Wan in order to defeat and protect the world from the dark spirit Fatu. Now a year later, during the harmonic convergence of 9829 BG, Rapha permanently merged herself with Wan, creating again what we'd call the Avatar. However, during the next convergence of 171 AG, Rapha was extracted from Korra and destroyed, with her connection to Wan and all the other avatars after him being forever lost. But we'll of course be talking about that entire situation later on in this video. But now Wan, aside from being the first avatar, was also the first human to experience and learn how to live in coexistence with the spirits themselves. And in fact, it was this decision to help bring balance between them and the rest of mankind that has forever shaped the world and the avatar in it, with each and every one of them striving to complete what he set out to do. However, despite this, during his time as the Avatar, Wan learned that to achieve this himself was a lot easier said than done, and after his defeat of Fatu, decided to seal the spirit portals to avoid any future conflicts between the spirits and the humans. But he also then spent the rest of his remaining life in the attempt to achieve this goal of a peaceful coexistence between the humans and the spirits. But as we of course seen throughout both series, and like I briefly just mentioned, this is something that still eludes us to this day. And honestly, with 2 series deep and a pile of comics in, I'm really starting to think that this is a goal that will never be achieved. Now following him, in the next earliest addition to the Avatar cycle that we know of currently is actually the newest Avatar to enter the series. An Avatar that was actually forgotten about altogether and lost to time itself prior to Aang finding and freeing her from the cursed existence within the spirit world. This Avatar is none other than Avatar Sonam from the Legend of Avatar Aang movie, and an Avatar that I secretly kind of believe to be one of, if not the absolute most powerful Avatar to ever exist. You see, Avatar Sonam was an airbending Avatar during the golden age of airbending, a time where tension was extremely high between the 4 nations, with the airbenders and nomads kind of existing as this mediator of balance between the clans. However, with the limited number of air nomads at her disposal at that time, this began to become almost impossible to maintain. So with that in mind, Avatar Sonam herself went deep into the spirit world, where she not only learned to channel the spirit energy within herself, but also used that knowledge and energy to create a staff that she could then use to grant airbending abilities to absolutely anyone she desired. With her eventually of course doing so to her devoted pupil, Taga, someone and something that didn't actually turn out the way that she had hoped. But we'll come back to that in just a second. Now as time went on, the nations began to see the balance between each other as pointless and unneeded, with the Earth Nation being the first to fight back against this peace, creating their own Earth Kingdom and army. An army they'd eventually use to obliterate the air nomads almost entirely, something that of course scarred Taga to his core and completely changed him into a man who now saw only revenge, power and war. With him then turn into Avatar Sonam in the hopes that she would use her power to not only make an army of airbenders, but to also use them to fight back against the Earth Kingdom and also obliterate all other nations that stood in their way. Something she of course refused to do, which eventually led Taga to stealing her staff and using it to imbue himself with a massive amount of spiritual power, forcing Avatar Sonam in that moment to not only fight back against her beloved pupil, but to also trap him within the ice on top of Mount Bayou forever, or at least until Avatar Aang decided to free him like a fucking idiot. But we'll come back to that in just a second. And sadly, during that fight, Avatar Sonam was actually mortally wounded and was now facing death. So as a last resort, Avatar Sonam sent her nomads deep into the mountains and hid herself, her staff and her temple deep in the spirit world where only the Avatar would ever find them. which of course thousands of years and many avatars later, Avatar Aang would be that avatar to do so, with him freeing Togga from the ice and being guided to the temple and staff by him alone. This of course is where he meets her and discovers the truth about Togga and his intentions. Now eventually, after defeating Togga and destroying Avatar Sonam's staff, Aang then reunites her with the other past lives in the Avatar cycle, which of course is where she remained until Korra destroyed the cycle and all the past lives along with it. But now moving on, next we have another newly addition to the Avatar collection. It's of course Avatar Xian, the earthbending avatar Aang meets and speaks with while searching for knowledge on Avatar Sonam. However, unlike Avatar Sonam, this avatar never really gets explored in the movie, and little is actually known about him at this time. However, it is clear from Aang's meeting with him that he was a bit of a womanizer and a bit of a forgetful jokester, while also seeming to be quite skilled in sand and plant bending. But that's really about all we know. He's only seen this one time for a couple of minutes and is never really explored more than that. However, he is an avatar that we know of and have met, so he of course has to be mentioned even if it is just briefly. Now up next we have Avatar Szeto, or as he is also known by much of the community, Avatar Jafar. Now Szeto is different to most avatars in the way that his claim to fame isn't actually related to his power level, despite being believed to be the first bender or avatar ever to lava bend in the universe. No, in fact his claim to fame is actually more akin to his incredible skills as a politician, which is actually displayed a little in his appearance. For you see, that big tall hat that has earned him the nickname Jafar is actually a minister's hat, again alluding to his political connection. But even more than that, Szeto lived in an era of immense crisis that threatened to destroy the entire Fire Nation, which if you were unaware at this point in time wasn't even classified as a nation and was more of just a group of warlords that came together to create what would eventually become known as the Fire Nation. Now this threat was the driving reason behind his devotion to that nation, which is why despite the duties every avatar has to the world of humans and spirits, Szeto focused almost exclusively on the Fire Nation alone, and used his time and power to build upon its strength and make it prosper. And unlike most avatars who saved their home using their power, he saved his home by becoming a bureaucrat, a diplomat, and an accountant, all in the service to the Fire Lord of that time. And it is said that after rising to Grand Advisor, Szeto greatly strengthened the Fire Nation's government, and even restored economic balance to the nation as a whole, and even along the way managed to set up programs to aid the poor and needy, the helpless and the hungry. So while he didn't end the century-long war like Aang or defeat ancient spirits like Korra, Szeto, at least in my opinion, is potentially one of the greatest avatar heroes of all time, and honestly one that has a story that aside from maybe Kyoshi's, deserves telling, and even animating. Like, would you not like to venture into the world of Avatar Jafar and witness as he helps make the Fire Nation into a nation? Like, I know I would, and honestly, I kinda really hope it happens. But for now, that's just wishful thinking. So let's just move on to Avatar YangChen, who of course is the air nomad avatar that followed after Szeto. Now YangChen, being of air nomad heritage, had a special and powerful connection to her avatar state and spiritual side, and in fact many to this day still argue in the community whether or not she was more spiritually endowed than even Aang. But despite this and her strong air connection to that spiritual side, she more often than not chooses to side predominantly with the humans, which down the line resulted in her being disliked and even hated by many of the world's spirits, with General Old Iron just being the one shown to us in the Lost Adventures comic, there of course being many more that is not yet shown to us. But what's also incredibly interesting about Avatar YangChen, and something many of you might not even be completely aware of, is that she's actually the biggest reason behind her predecessor Kuruk dying so young, and eventually becoming known as what many would call the worst avatar of all time. For you see, throughout her time alive, the humans and the spirits had countless run-ins with each other, and many wars were fought because of this, with either side suffering incredible pain and death. She, like I briefly mentioned, more often than not in many of these situations, decided predominantly to side with the humans, which again, understandably, didn't go down so well with the spirits, leading her to have her own countless run-ins with them. Again, more often than not, ending in either side suffering pain and death. So following her passing and the rise of Kuruk, there were a lot of spiritual attacks happening all around the world, many of which likely coming about because of YangChen's mistreatment and decision to at times just straight up ignore the spirits and their issues. So Kuruk obviously inherited all of this and believed it his duty to not only follow in her footsteps but to also maintain her good-natured reputation by taking it upon himself to become known as the world's greatest hunter of spirits. He hunted down and killed countless dark and evil spirits that plagued the world around him to of course protect the humans, but mostly because he believed, following YangChen's example, that the humans and their issues must take priority over the spirits and theirs. But even more than that, following YangChen's many great achievements while being the Avatar came a time of peace among the humans and the four nations that lasted an entire generation, which at that time was completely unheard of. This was of course achieved because the nations had a great deal of respect for YangChen and her efforts. So Kuruk of course knew that to protect this piece, her reputation as a holy figure had to be preserved. But he also knew these spirits had to be dealt with. So he basically took it upon himself to sacrifice any hope of being remembered as a good avatar to do what needed to be done. To do what no one else possibly could, forsaking his role as the bridge between two worlds to of course protect and progress humanity over the spirits. Which is why, and I'll touch more on this a little later in the video, but why I think Kuruk, who is known as the youngest and worst avatar to have ever existed, is actually one of the most misunderstood and underrated of all time. But before we can fully dive into all of that, there's one last aspect about YangChen that I have to mention when explaining her, and that's of course her secret, dark and forbidden ability to sound bend, which is essentially the ability to take all the air in one's lungs and let it out in a massive powerful wave of air and sound. A wave so powerful in fact that it is said to have the power to separate an entire ocean, much like Moses himself is said to have done with the Red Sea. But now with all of that said, let's finally discuss Kuruk, the water avatar that of course followed after YangChen. Now of course we've already mentioned a great deal about his connection to YangChen and how he almost sacrificed himself entirely to protect her reputation. But now let's finally discuss who he actually was and the kind of avatar that he eventually grew into becoming. So Kuruk from the Northern Water Tribe, like we briefly mentioned, was and still is considered the worst avatar to have ever existed. This of course is mostly just due to him having lived such a young life, dying at the age of 33, which when compared to Kyoshi, the avatar that of course followed after him, is shockingly young, given that she of course was able to live to the age of 230. But now aside from the obvious, who exactly was he? Well, Kuruk for the most part was the avatar who had potentially the hardest life, at least in my opinion. Because from the moment of his birth, he was thrown into a world that was filled with humans and spirits fighting, constantly killing one another. He mastered all four elements and then ventured to the spirit world and fought against a number of powerful spirits of his own, with every kill causing him to lose part of his vitality, which again is a massive reason behind his youthful demise. But even more than that, this loss of vitality also forced him into a pseudo state of pain for the rest of his life, which apparently eventually led him into becoming a drunk and a womanizer, all in hopes of removing some of this pain even just for a moment. But now, like I said, during his time as the Avatar, he had a great deal of dark spirits trying to break into the human world and kill and wreak havoc. So in order to prevent this, he continuously returned to the spirit world himself to kill them, eventually learning that with every kill, his vitality was lessening every single time, of course bringing him closer and closer to his own death. But despite knowing this, he decided to take the weight of killing all these spirits and forever being known as a terrible avatar on his own shoulders, all in the hopes of maybe preventing more suffering and death on behalf of these dark spirits. Eventually he found himself in a fight like no other with a dark spirit known as Father Glowworm, who although he was able to defeat rather easily, still managed to inflict a wound that could never be healed. A wound that would eventually down the line end up killing him off. But despite knowing all of this beforehand and dealing with immense pain every single day of his life, Kuruk still managed to find love in the form of a water tribe girl named Umi, who he fell in love with at first sight and eventually went on to marry. However, despite this being the happiest day of his life, it soon turned to shit rather quickly when Ko the Face Stealer appeared and took Umi out of revenge against the Avatar. Now, many of the events that followed after this aren't completely known to us yet, but it is believed that he returned to the spirit world and killed many more dark spirits when trying to find Ko and Umi. But again, it's unclear if he ever actually managed to do so. So yeah, while he may have been one of the less impressive avatars of all time, he has still, at least in my opinion, the saddest story out of every avatar, and one that honestly really deserves telling, if anything just to give this avatar the respect he deserves. But next, let's cover Yun, the only false avatar that ever existed. Now the reason he's even on this list in the first place is just because he plays significant importance in Avatar Kyoshi's life, who is of course the avatar that we'll be covering in just a couple of minutes. Now Yun in many ways suffered as much if not more than many of the other avatars, and his being credited as being an avatar was of no real fault of his own. He was pushed towards this belief by the greed and the selfish nature of the one that he believed to be a friend and master, Jianzu. Now Jianzu longed to be the one to find and raise the avatar because by doing so you almost guarantee yourself great wealth as a result. So in this longing, he rushed a test to find the avatar and pushed the belief that Yun was the avatar onto everyone else around. He believed because Yun's bending and Paisho skills were nearly identical to Avatar Kuruk's that he must be the reincarnation of the late avatar. So without proper testing him or anyone else around, he rushed to report to the world that the Earth avatar has been found, and that he is indeed Yun. Now Yun would go on to train in earthbending combat skills and poison training under Jianzu, all while making friends with both Rangi, the daughter of his firebending teacher, and Kyoshi, his respective maid. But eventually down the line, it's revealed that the powerful but awkward maid Kyoshi was indeed the true avatar, when she displayed incredible power to save Yun from the Fifth Nation. But still worried about being wrong once again, Jianzhu after this reveal took the betrayed Yun and Kyoshi to the Dark Spirit Father Glowworm, where he had them both tested to see which of them is the true avatar, which of course was soon revealed to be Kyoshi. After finding this out, however, Jianzhu attacked the spirit and took Kyoshi away, leaving Yun to suffer punishment for this betrayal by Father Glowworm back in the cave. It is then presumed by all involved that Yun had died, but that wasn't completely true. But now before we cover what happens next for the false avatar, I first want to go over and cover and explain Avatar Kyoshi, the longest living and strongest avatar of all time, at least in my opinion. Now Kyoshi, the 7-foot tall goddess, is about the coolest and most badass female avatar of all time, and potentially just the coolest avatar that has ever lived. She, like we previously mentioned, came up with nothing, despite being the avatar. This of course was because of Yun. But it wasn't all that negative, as growing up with no one or anything to her name, it allowed her to grow an appreciation for everything that she had and that was given to her. She eventually found a father figure in Kelseg and a lifelong friend and eventual lover in Rangi. She would eventually lose her other friend Yun in that cave from earlier, but this would later only push her to becoming one of the strongest and most ruthless avatars of all time. She longed to kill Jianzhu after all he did to her and went out to the world with Rangi in order to do just that. She eventually found him in a bar where it was revealed that Yun was actually still alive. After this reveal, Jianzhu goes to bring the building down around everyone but is stopped by Kyoshi's own power. Yun then uses this moment to stick Jianzhu with a sharp rock, killing him out of revenge for the pain that he has suffered on behalf of his actions and greed. He then winks at Kyoshi and leaves. But later, when Yun comes back to kill Rangi, Kyoshi takes it up on herself to end his life by freezing all of his internal organs completely. But after this, Kyoshi parts ways with her team and lover Rangi, and then goes on to learn the remaining elements, as well as learning everything there is to know about her spiritual side, from none other than the water avatar, Kuruk himself. Eventually, she goes on to use everything she has learned and the power that she had gained to push for equality all around the world, one day returning to her hometown to do the very same thing, eventually training the women of that village in the Kyoshi arts, turning them from weak and vulnerable women into unmatched Kyoshi warriors. Down the line, after becoming renowned around the world, she would go on to find herself in a confrontation with Qin the Conqueror, a confrontation that would go down as a defining moment in history. Previously, Qin the Conqueror wanted to take over the world for himself, eventually coming to Kyoshi's hometown to do the very same. However, Kyoshi wouldn't stand for it and in a massive display of power ripped apart the part of the island that housed her village and separated it from the mainland, creating what would eventually become known as Kyoshi Island. But by doing so, she also accidentally killed Qin the Conqueror. But it is said by Kyoshi herself that no matter what happened that day, she was always going to return to kill him off, stating that she will always do what needs to be done to maintain the balance in the world, even if that means killing someone who threatens it. But following this death, she did manage to usher in an era of peace that is said to have been like no other. One that, although it is never clearly stated, is believed to have lasted until the very day that she died, in 82 BG at the age of 230. Now, if you'd like to hear literally every single detail about her life story from birth to death, you can check out this video linked in the description down below. Or if you'd like to see me explain why she's stronger than Avatar Aang in almost every single way, you can also check out this video, again linked down below. But for now, let's just move on to Avatar Roku, the fire avatar that of course followed after Kyoshi. Now Roku, unlike Kyoshi, Kuruk and even Yun, had a fairly easy go of it, with the biggest struggle that he had to go through being the ending of his friendship with Fire Lord Sozin. But even that, when we really think about it, wasn't all that bad until of course the day that he died, when Sozin had the choice to save him or just let him die. Of course choosing the latter in that moment, but we'll come back to that in just a second. Now Roku, in many ways, at least in my opinion, can and should be considered the worst avatar of all time, simply because although he lived quite a long life, never really achieved anything during that lifetime, and took potentially the longest out of every avatar that we know of to master all 4 elements, with it being stated that he didn't master them all until he hit the age of 28. And to just put that in perspective for you all, he began his avatar training at 16, meaning it took 12 years to do something that Aang was able to do in less than 1. Meaning he's borderline fucking useless, at least when compared to pretty much any of the other avatars that we know of. But if I'm really being fair, it should also be known that he did become better than his respective master every single time. So you could say that his mastery over the respective element may be some of the highest. But I say could have and may have been because we really don't know. He's never really seen display much of his power in any way. And let's not forget that this is also the avatar that also had the opportunity to prevent the war that took 100 years to end, if he did what Kyoshi would have done and killed Sozin when he had the chance. Of course, it's a decision that he did go on to regret massively, but it is still one that he could have made and should have made. But now, at least in death, he did achieve something when he of course guided and taught Aang the importance of his role as the Avatar. But if I'm really being honest, giving him credit for something like that just feels like I'm taking the achievement earned by Aang and putting it onto him, which just feels kinda wrong. So because this isn't an avatar ranking video, which I do plan to make and I plan to put him at the bottom, I'm just going to move on to Aang and leave Roku where he is. Now Aang is a character like no other, and one that really doesn't need all that much explaining, as we're all aware that he is the best and most charismatic avatar of all time. So as to not bore all of you with a story that you all already know all too well, I'm just going to make this explanation of Aang a quick one and then move on. Now Aang, after he found out he was the Avatar, ran away from home, leaving his people to suffer death on behalf of Sozin and his forces. He, along with Appa, his best friend and flying bison, eventually found themselves frozen in a massive chunk of ice that was created and held together by Aang's accidental awakening of the Avatar state. He later, after 100 years had passed, was freed by Sokka and Katara, two individuals who carried him through much of his journey, with Katara eventually becoming his waterbending master and wife. Along the way he met up with Toph, the blind bandit, who of course taught him the ways of earthbending. Although with an unexpected joining of Zuko, Aang was able to then learn and master all 4 of the elements. However, despite him now being ready to fight Zuko's dad, the Fire Lord, Aang was still hesitant about ending his life. So he took some time alone and eventually found floating in the sea the last of the energy bending lion turtles, who granted him the knowledge and ability to bend someone's energy within their body, basically granting him the ability to give or remove someone's bending completely. Now finally, with this and his mastery over all 4 elements, Aang was finally able to face Ozai on slightly unequal grounds. After a long and incredibly cool fight, Aang decided to spare his life, but after Ozai went for a kill shot using his firebending, Aang decided to remove his bending altogether, leaving him powerless and borderline worthless. Now after this, Aang, alongside Zuko, the new Fire Lord, would go on to lead the world into a new era of peace and harmony. This is until the day of his death, which came in 153 AG, at the young age of just 66. You see, he died so young due to much of his energy and life force having been sapped away during his time in the ice as a child. If not for this, there's no reason why he couldn't have lived to 100 and something. But now following this death came his birth and reincarnation as Korra, the final avatar on our list to explain. Now Korra, much like Aang, is a story that we all know very well, and one that doesn't need explaining all that much. So like I did with Aang, we'll quickly do a run through of the major moments and then move on. So Korra was discovered as the Avatar at the young age of only 4 in the Southern Water Tribe. This was because she was immediately talented at water, earth and firebending, being able to bend all of them at the young age of only 4 years old. But Korra's hot-headed and independent personality kept her wanting to learn more about the world that she was supposed to protect. So one day, many years later, after honing her skills as a waterbender, she ventured out into the world, all in the hopes of making lasting memories of her own. Along the way, she formed a team and joined Tenzin, Aang's youngest child, in airbending and spirit training. However, she didn't take to it much at first and eventually just sacked it off, thinking it was unimportant and that she'd be fine without it. But along the way, she faced incredibly dangerous and powerful foes such as Amon, who after defeating both her and Maku removed her access to her bending altogether, by severing the link that she had using his bloodbending. Korra after this fell into a deep depression and lost all will to live, feeling as though she failed all her past lives and the people of the earth. But right then, when she was about to hit rock bottom, Aang and the other past lives appeared and gave her back her ability to bend, with Aang using his energy bending to unblock her access to her bending abilities, as well as in that moment teaching Korra how to use energy bending for herself. After this, she returned to Tenzin and finally mastered airbending. Down the line, after being betrayed and tricked more than once by Unalaq managed to begin harmonic convergence and opened up the spirit portals and freed Fatu, the dark spirit with the same power as Rafa. After merging with the dark spirit, Unalaq became the first and only dark avatar to have ever lived. Now using his newfound power, he extracted Rafa from Korra and destroyed her, forever severing the link that she had with her past lives. Although later, after her astral fight with the dark spirit, Korra managed to recover part of Rafa's spirit and regained her connection to the avatar cycle. Only now, with all past lives having been forever lost due to the prior destruction, Korra remains as the first in the long line of future avatars. Now a lot more of course happens after this, with her meeting the mighty Toph and even at some point fighting and defeating Sahir, but aside from her restarting the avatar cycle, nothing of any real importance followed after this. So we're just going to leave the rest of the story out for now, but one day I might do a video explaining the entire life of Korra in extreme detail. So of course subscribe and keep an eye out for that. But now finally, the last avatar on our list is actually an avatar that we have never actually officially seen just yet, but one that we all know is coming. It's Avatar Pavi, the future earthbending avatar following after Avatar Korra. Now again, not much is currently known about her and her story, and everything is kind of just speculation at best, because again, it hasn't actually happened yet. However, what we do know for certain is that she will be a one-legged avatar living in a post-apocalyptic dystopian world that has forever been destroyed by Avatar Korra herself. She's also the second avatar to ever have a twin sister, and an avatar with potentially the hardest journey ahead of her that any avatar has ever had, due to the fact that in this world and in this time, bending and benders are currently in hiding, and afraid to ever use their bending abilities at all. meaning for her to ever learn the 4 bending styles, it's going to be next to impossible for her to find a master to teach her. However, despite this, alongside her friend and airbending master Jay, Pavi sets forth hoping to fix all the problems that Avatar Korra has caused during her time. It's definitely going to be an interesting story and one that I personally cannot wait to learn more about in the coming months. But now, in conclusion, after everything is said and done in today's video, what we have learned is Kuruk is the most underrated avatar, Aang is the best, Kyoshi is the strongest, and Korra or Roku are by far the worst. So with all that said, tell me your thoughts on all of this down below in the comments, and consider subscribing for more Avatar content in the future. That's going to do it for me in this one. I hope you have a great day or night wherever you are, and peace.